Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
I don't like the phrase "we were going to hold them back." I don't like holding them back. I don't think we're holding them back at all.
We gifted her another year of childhood.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm the dad to 6 daughters and the author of 6 books about how to help your family to be happy. And I'm here with my Mrs. Happy Families, my wife, Kylie. We're going to talk today about the geeky stuff. This is one of my favourite episodes. I only get to do it once a month because you don't like it that much. You're like, do we have to do this one really? From the doctor's desk. This is where I get to talk to you about what the latest science is telling us about raising children. This is important stuff.
It is important. I will give you that.
So, I've been perusing the various studies that come across my desk from time to time, and 3 have caught my eye. I think that in some ways, a lot of research into parenting kind of comes from the University of Durr. Like, we know a lot about parenting, and it doesn't change very much. Nevertheless, there are some really important reminders and some important conversations to be had about these topics. We've got 3 to talk about. One of them is about breastfeeding. One is about learning disorders with kids and how old they are at school. And the other one is about psychological control and how much parents are kind of riding their kids psychologically. Which one do you want to talk about first?
I reckon we talk about kids at school.
Okay, let's talk about this one then. So a recent study, this came from a Finnish study, as in Finnish, not as in at the end of the race, but Finnish as in from Finland. Hello to everyone in Finland. I'm so sorry if that was a bad joke. This is a brand new study published in March 2021. And what these researchers did, we're talking about 388,650 children, all born, no twins in this one, just single child births. Born
How many?
388,500, born from 1996 to 2002. It's pretty much every child born in Finland.
So it's pretty. This is pretty good.
Yeah, it's a big study.
Yeah.
And it's very well done because it's what we call a prospective study. In other words, we're getting the data. We're not asking people to fill in a survey and say, hey, can you remember back to when this happened? We're not asking for people to self-report what they recall. Prospective means we get the data as it happens. So we're getting data as the children are born, and then we're following them across time. It's a big longitudinal study. This is a really high quality study. Yeah. And what they're looking at is which kids get diagnosed with learning disorders, and can we find anything in this that might tell us something about how we do psychology and how we work out who does and who doesn't have a learning disorder. Now, this is really controversial. It's really provocative, but we've known this sort of stuff for a number of years now. There's a bunch of studies that have come out over the last handful of years that have highlighted that if you're the youngest child in your class, or if you're in the younger cohort in that class, you're far more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD.
Does that go across boys and girls?
Yeah, it does. It does. But boys are still much more likely than girls to get that diagnosis. Now, this doesn't mean, by the way, that if you're the youngest in the class that you will be diagnosed. What it highlights, though, and many thoughtful researchers have said it far more eloquently than I'm going to say it, but what it essentially says is we are labeling immaturity and a lack of development as a psychological abnormality.
Well, this goes back to that conversation that we had with Maggie a little bit
a couple of days ago.
Yeah, just the acknowledgement that we are expecting our boys to do things that they're not developmentally ready to do.
Yeah.
And you know, this study is really kind of highlighting that in a different way.
Well, that's not actually what they found. They've acknowledged that this is what researchers have found previously. And so they've followed across 9 to 10 years. These are children that have been followed for the first decade of life. And what the researchers were looking at was not ADHD. They were looking at learning disorders. And this is the conclusion that they reach. And I'm going to quote, relatively younger children in Finnish schools were more likely to be diagnosed with a specific learning disorder by the age of 10. And what they're arguing is that increased awareness of how relative age differences affect the likelihood for children to be diagnosed with specific learning disorders is really important for us to get our head around as parents, as clinicians, and as teachers. And what it's basically saying is we need to widen the net. It's not just ADHD. It's learning disorders generally. One of the things that we've battled with, and we've talked about this a number of times over the years, is And parents, as at this time of the year, parents are saying, when do I send my kids to school? I've got a 4-year-old, or my child's going to be 4 in the early part of next year. They're old enough to go to school. We know that in Tasmania and Western Australia, here in Australia at least, there's increasing emphasis and even state laws where the cutoff date, you're basically sending your kids to school at younger and younger ages. And a lot of parents, for many other reasons like childcare costs or the fact that they've got to get back to work, especially if you're living in Sydney and the cost of a house at the moment, median house price, I think, is about $43 million a year now to live in Sydney. Like it's off the scale. That's an exaggeration, of course. But there's a lot of pressure on parents to get their children back into school. But when we're sending them early, what happens is that they don't have the maturity. They don't have the social skills. They don't have the capacity to regulate their emotions. And the teachers, with the very best of intentions, say to parents, your kids are really struggling. And so then they go off and they get diagnosed with the doctor or with the psychologist or with the counsellor, whoever they go to see, the occupational therapist. And over and over and over again, we're seeing this data come out that highlights that these diagnoses are associated with the age. And if you're younger in your cohort, you're significantly more likely to get the diagnosis. And I think that this means that we've really got to be careful about what we're doing when it comes to sending our kids to school.
You know, we've gone through this process a couple of times because we have 2 children who actually celebrate their birthdays in April, which put them at the cutoff point to actually attend school before they turned 5. And with our first daughter, we actually chose to send her off because she's, one of 5 children, and she was smart, intelligent, and very capable.
And everyone at preschool said, oh, she's ready.
She'll be fine.
Not only will she be fine, she's thriving here. She's going to be bored if you give her another year of play-based fun at preschool. You need to send her off to school. Get her going.
And so we did. And it wasn't so obvious at the beginning.
No, not at all.
But as she has moved up the grades in school, we are noticing the fact that she just struggles a little bit socially. She's doing well academically, but socially is probably her biggest thing. And just being that little bit younger than all of her peers has had such an impact on the way she sees the world and the way others see her as a result.
And her confidence.
Yeah.
Because she's smaller and she's not quite as mature. Like you can really, it's measurable. Whereas the other child born in the same month, we decided, because I'd finally finished the PhD and done a whole lot more learning and reading and investigating, we decided that I don't like the phrase we were going to hold them back. I don't like holding them back. I don't think we're holding them back at all.
We gifted her another year of childhood.
I think that's a much better way to say it. And this child has thrived. She's mature. She's a leader of the pack. She's doing really well. And I think that extra year of being able to play and grow up before she went into the pressured environment that school is increasingly becoming at the lower grades, it's been really good for her. So that's the first study that I wanted to share. We'll share a link to that study in the show notes so that you can see it if you're interested in it. And we will come back after the break and talk about our other 2 studies about breastfeeding and psychological control.
It's the Happy Families Podcast.
Are screens creating tension at home? Tweens, Teens and Screens is a webinar to guide families to healthy, safe super screen solutions. Buy it today at happyfamilies.com.au/shop.
It's the Happy Families Podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. And today we are coming from the doctor's desk. This is Justin's Geek Out session. He gets to share all of the awesome research that's come past his desk in the last few weeks.
What are you going to do next? Do you want to do the breastfeeding one or do you want to do the psychological control?
Let's do breastfeeding.
Okay, so again, as a quick, before we begin, kind of disclaimer, we recognise and understand that for any number of reasons, many mums either can't or have not had the capacity or the opportunity to breastfeed. And so what we're going to share, sometimes people get really triggered and upset because we're saying breastfeeding's healthy and a new study has come out to tell us that. But it can be hard for mums to be able to breastfeed, and many want to, and there's no shame or guilt if it hasn't worked out for you. So this is a brand new study that's appeared on my desk. It was in the Frontiers in Public Health, and the researchers are looking at the relationship between breastfeeding and how long mums are able to breastfeed and the cognitive performance of their 9 and 10-year-old children. So this is a longitudinal study. We've got kids coming in as brand new newborn babies with their mums and providing this baseline data. And then the children were basically put into a couple of different groups as they aged based on the number of months of breastfeeding that they received. 0 was group 1. 1 to 6 months was group 2. 7 to 12 months was group 3. And more than 12 months was group 4. Okay, so we've got different levels of breastfeeding experience. And what the research basically found, there was a whole lot of stuff that they did, but the research essentially found that intelligence tests at the age of 9 or 10 showed that the children who were breastfed the longest did best on the intelligence tests. In other words, this is pretty strong data showing an association between length of time breastfeeding and IQ.
It'd be interesting to me to know whether or not it is predominantly because of the breastfeeding or because of the relationship between the maternal relationship that's developed between parent and child in that process. I think that has to come into play in how our children respond and grow and develop.
One of the challenges with studies like this is we don't actually know what's causing what. This is an association or a correlation. It's not saying breastfeeding causes higher IQ. And the reason we can't know that for sure is because we can't always tease apart the socio-economic status of the family. It may be that people who have greater wealth breastfeed for longer, maybe because mum can afford to stay at home longer and be more hands-on. Or it may be that people who are in intact families are able to have mum at home while there's a primary breadwinner who goes out and earns the money. Whereas if you're a single mum, you've fallen pregnant, had a child, and now dad's not around, you can't breastfeed because you've got to provide for your family. So there's all these other variables that could confuse the issue. And then, of course, what you were talking about.
It interests me because often, a milestone for a bottle-fed child is that they can hold their own bottle. And there's lots of hacks all over Facebook of different ways that you can prop the bottle up so that you don't have to hold the baby's bottle. And therefore, that child is not getting that hands-on touch, feel, connection with mum that a breastfed baby gets purely because of the delivery of milk. And so I'd be really interested to know.
Anyway, I think that it's a really interesting study just to remind parents or soon-to-be parents or people that you know who are thinking about, do I or don't I, if you've got the capacity to, and of course there's no judgment because some people simply can't, but if you've got the capacity, the research is really, really clear. Children do better when they're breastfed, IQ and maybe even attachment like you were talking about before. So the third study, this is the one that I actually am the most excited about, the one that I find most compelling. This is a study that's published in the prestigious Parenting, Science and Practice journal. I really, really like this journal. The editor of this journal is just top shelf, and the papers that make it in here are usually very, very good. And it tells a really compelling story about the way we control our kids. It's been done in a sample of Chinese adolescents, but the results are consistent with what we find across pretty much every culture in the world. So I think that it's definitely worth talking about here. We've got a bunch of adolescent Chinese kids aged around about 11 and a half on average. Their mums are in their mid to late 30s. And what we're looking at is a couple of things. We're looking at how controlling mum is. We're looking at the quality of the mother-child relationship. And we're looking at the extent to which that adolescent has depression and other internalizing problems. So depression, anxiety, the sort of stuff that kids bury deep inside themselves and makes them sad and angry. And in this study, what the researchers found is that when mum is controlling, that is when and this isn't the child saying mum's controlling, this is mum filling in a survey saying these are the things that I do that are controlling. When mum self-identifies as being higher on control, the teenager is filling in a survey about the quality of the relationship with mum. And there's a negative association here. That is, as control goes up, relationship quality goes down. The more mum perceives, I am actually pretty controlling, the more the child says, I don't like my relationship with my mum. And the more likely it is that the child is going to report having internalizing problems like depression and anxiety. Big take-home message here. Don't control your kids. Stay off their back. The 3 E's of effective discipline are the answer. When your child's doing something and you feel like you need to step in and be controlling, explore what's going on, explain what you expect, and then empower them, give them autonomy, volition, the opportunity to make their own decisions. That is what we call high-quality parenting, and that's what leads to the best outcomes. So the take-home message from our first study, we know that it's probably best if it's possible for you to let your kids extend their childhood for another year before they go to school, if state laws allow and if your personal circumstances allow. That's the first take-home message. Second take-home message.
Breastfed babies are going to do better.
And again, we know that circumstances don't always allow it, but to the extent that you can, encourage new young mums, people who are raising infants, to breastfeed to the extent that they possibly can. And the third take-home message, as I mentioned, to the extent that you can, try to lay off the control. Try to give your kids autonomy. They're going to do better. See, that wasn't that hard, was it?
No, it wasn't. But that's because I'm sitting on this side of the desk and you get to interpret everything that's coming through the computer.
Well, the science says we can be great parents, and hopefully that's been helpful. If you do enjoy the podcast, we'd love it if you could leave a rating and review and tell others about it so that they can find out how to make their families happier. Tomorrow, I'll do better tomorrow. This is our favourite episode of the week, and it seems to be a listener favourite as well. We're going to talk about what went well this week and maybe what didn't. I'm looking forward to finding out how your week's gone, Mrs. Happy Families. Please, if you would like more information about how you can make your family happier, visit happyfamilies.com.au.